blessings, all my 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 blessings. I need my blessings every penny.
Getting right into it today. 3 top 10 teams collapse as we get our first major shakeup of the college football season, of course. But number 4, Alabama. Number 2, Georgia was the top game on the slate. And boy, was it something. You thought Alabama was going to run away with it early, 21-0 in the first quarter. 21-7. Then we had 30-7 at the half. We just thought that Alabama was going to take to the Georgia Bulldogs and just take them out. Jalen Milroe had big runs. He finished with 117 yards rushing and a couple of touchdowns there. Looks phenomenal. Looks like a much better quarterback than last season. DeVore has clearly developed him, much like Michael Penix when he moved from Indiana to Washington, which is just awesome. Awesome to see. Jalen Milroe, 27 for 33, passing for 374 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick, over 11 yards per toss there. And that puts him at nearly 500 yards of total offense. Just phenomenal. Of course, we had Georgia rally there, down a couple scores at half. Then they scored a nice little touchdown coming down to start the third, hit a 2-point conversion, and all of a sudden, they're already starting to get in the ball game a little bit here. If they can contain Alabama's explosivity and not turn the ball over. I mean, Carson Beck had 3 picks, could have thrown another one in there. They nearly had a fumble on a punt return as well. That would have been dangerous. Overall, Beck was 27 for 50 passing for 439. Really had to get everything he could out there. But they do rally, and in the fourth quarter, after a slow third, they finally take the lead towards the back end there on a big touchdown pass. And Alabama does not panic. Why, you say? Why? Well, if you watch the game, which you should have been doing, the 17-year-old wide receiver is where repeatedly told on the broadcast over and over again, Ryan Williams catches a big 75-yard touchdown, hits a spin, hits a little juke, hits a little stiff arm, and runs 75 yards for a big touchdown play there to put Alabama back on top. They hit the 2-point conversion to go up a solid 7, but that doesn't matter in the end. That is the difference in the football game. So Georgia outscores them 18-8 in the fourth quarter. But ultimately, it is Alabama that scores the last touchdown and keeps the big lead at the beginning there safe. But man, what a game this was, right? 3 different stories. Alabama taking a big lead and absolutely baffling Georgia's offensive line, and Carson Beck and hitting him, nearly getting a safety in there as well. Or they did count the safety there in the second quarter. Sorry. Got the safety in there as well. The comeback by Georgia, and then the epic finale where they were trading touchdowns back and forth. Just a great game. Now, this is what you tend to see in some of these bigger games after a softer schedule where a team dominates. They throw some wrinkles in there on both sides of the football, which is what Alabama did, and kind of confused Georgia. We're used to Georgia kind of adapting and not having these kind of problems. They were on the road, though. As previously stated, both of these teams seem to not really have explosive playmakers the past couple of years, oddly. But it seems like Alabama's found something here, with Ryan Williams especially, and Jalen Milroe as a dual threat quarterback. Carson Beck is still something, I think, but he really struggled here in the first half. The fact that he was composed and came out and really threw the ball around in the second half and made some big plays was huge, I think. Trevor Etienne, 12 carries, 55 yards, 4.6 per carry and a touchdown. Didn't hit any big plays in this game for Georgia. I thought he'd be a difference maker at the running back position there. He still hit some solid little chunks there, but again, being down kind of took him out of the equation a little bit there. Adrian Smith had 6 catches for 132 and a touchdown. Dylan Bell out of the backfield as well had 5 for 100 yards and a touchdown. And Lovett, who's supposed to be a top receiver, returning at 6 catches for 59 yards. But again, Georgia just doesn't seem to have the horses at the skill position player per se. Thought they'd changed it up a little bit there and just didn't quite have anything going for them. But Alabama seems to have something going on at the skill position player, the quarterback position. 3 sacks, 6 tackles for losses, 9 credited passes defended, 0 sacks for Georgia, 7 tackles for losses, 3 batted passes, a couple of fumbles as well that were re-recovered by Georgia. So it could have been much worse. They could have been facing a much bigger deficit, but they just, do a great job rallying in the second half here. I think that has to be credited. But Alabama is something else. And you can see why DeVore is just so widely regarded in his ability to coach and why he was tapped for this position. Just look forward to seeing what Alabama can do in the future here. I believe in some cases they've leapt to the favorite in the SEC. Of course, Texas has looked very good so far. The secondary, we have to see how that has come along. Alabama in its own right. And the secondary was a question as well. Georgia was able to exploit that a little bit, but they were also able to cover up some of the secondary problems. A lot of young guys back there. And, of course, we saw one of the freshman corners pick off the game-saving play there as Alabama was kind of driving for what could have been a game-tying touchdown. So they had a shot at it, but just wasn't meant to be. So looking forward, Georgia's going to have a tough time. Should have known better than to just assume that they would kind of push ahead of some of these other teams, judging by the talent that they lost a little bit here, some of the depth. But they still have to play Texas on the road, Ole Miss on the road. We'll get to them in a second. Tennessee at home. And Auburn can be a little frisky, too. They've got them at home this upcoming week as well. And Georgia Tech to end the season. So we'll see what Georgia does here. It'd be too bad if they lost a couple games or at risk of falling out of the playoffs and did something like Florida State did last season where it was kind of national championship or playoffs or big game or bust, and then they just, team kind of rests everyone vacates for the transfer portal towards the end of the season. That'd be too bad. I don't expect that, but let's hope Georgia kind of figures some things out and at least stays strong and gives us some games. I would fully expect that, but I think Alabama looks mighty strong moving forward with the Jaden Milroe just looking very impressive. Some weapons there. Development in the secondary, especially of guys like Zabian Brown, who made the game-saving interception. Shouldn't say game-saving. I mean, Georgia had an opportunity to tie it late. Pass into the end zone. He made a good play on the ball. Freshman there out of Santa Ana, California. And if they see some more development there, guys continuing to play well, then Alabama could make a push for the national championship game. Just saying, all the games we're watching, that's not off the table yet. So, man, what a great game that was. Ole Miss, ranked 6th, right? Playing Kentucky. Kentucky, I don't know what to do with this squad. They lose big to South Carolina at home. They play close to Georgia and lose by a point. They beat Ohio 41-6 and Southern Miss 31-0. That's fine. And now they beat Ole Miss 20-17. So perhaps they're a good team. And it's the South Carolina, the huge loss there that's the outlier. Very interesting. They're not a team that can pass really well. Brock Vandagriff, of course, played one of his better games in this department. That's really just kind of a ball control kind of thing. And we know the defensive front is very good. They got after Ole Miss quite a bit. 4 sacks, 7 tackles for loss. On the flip side, Ole Miss had 5 sacks and 10 tackles for loss in this defensive battle. Ole Miss scored 10 of their points in the third quarter. Kentucky was pretty consistently able to at least, they scored in every quarter, put a little bit of a drive together at least. Vandagriff was 18 for 28 for 243 in this one and a touchdown again. His better numbers altogether on the season. They didn't run for a whole bucket. Jackson Dart, 1 passing touchdown. This one, they were 1 for 10 on third down, 8 penalties and a turnover, 3 yards per rush, 9.7 per pass attempt. Kentucky, 25% on third down conversions. These teams were combined 5 for 5 on fourth down. Ole Miss ahead of the yardage altogether, only by a touch. Kentucky also couldn't run the ball, but didn't turn it over, didn't commit many penalties, and had twice as much in the time of possession, just slowly kind of grinding it out here, which seems to be the key to them winning. And that's really about it. It's nothing too spectacular, other than Ole Miss finally played a team that has a pretty good defense, and it just doesn't seem to matter how atrocious their offense can be, as long as they can slowly grind the game away and play these close ones. Ole Miss best win now at Wake Forest, 40-6. Their other wins, Furman, Middle Tennessee, and Georgia Southern. That is disgusting. They play at South Carolina next, then at LSU. So they could have, I don't know, who knows what happens coming up here. That South Carolina team may be a little bit sneaky as well. They're 3-1 at this point. They beat that Kentucky squad. I mean, they have their own flaws as well, but Ole Miss, man, it may not be a Heisman season for Jackson Dart after all. Next up, Utah. Now, we've known how important Cam Rising is to this team. The defense is still very important. We played musical quarterbacks last season. Isaac Wilson got another start here for Utah at home, but still, losing to Arizona 23-10 is pretty bad. And perhaps Cam Rising overcomes some of that. It's just amazing how he's not ever been in the conversation for Heisman or like a top even 10, 20, maybe 10 quarterback in the country. Yet his efficiency as just a real quarterback is so important to Utah. It's just so important. Isaac was 20 for 40, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, 280 yards. His QBR was 18.4, 80.4 for Noah Fifta on the other side. 18 for 31, 197 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. And they were just the better football team. There's not a whole lot to say there. 23 points is not particularly impressive, but they had more sacks than Utah did, 3-1. So the defense wasn't particularly outrageous for Utah either. 0 for 4 on fourth down was Utah. Yardage was about the same. 2-1 turnover margin. Utah, too many, couple picks there. Utah also couldn't run the ball, which was not super helpful. Well, Arizona could at over 6 yards per attempt. And that was about it. Couple turnovers. Got smashed on fourth down over and over again, giving Arizona better position, and they were able to score. McMillan, the receiver, 6 catches for 50 yards on 13 targets. Was that 13 targets? On a lot of targets. He needs to be a bigger piece of Arizona's game. He's just very important. If he was regularly targeted and really putting up numbers, he could be in the Heisman race. He's just such an amazing wide receiver. Burnett was actually the leading receiver, 5 for 76 and a touchdown. But we need more McMillan in this Arizona Wildcat offense. They are now 3-1, and Utah is now 4-1. So interesting to keep an eye on these two teams moving forward. Miami was scared. 38-34 was the final here. It ended on a Hail Mary. It was a lead early for Miami. Then it swung a little bit towards Virginia Tech, who led at the half. And it was certainly not panic time for Miami. But playing at home in the rain, this is the Thursday, Friday game, something like that. Friday game. And Virginia Tech has gone down early in several games and rallied to come back and just not been able to survive some of these early holes. And now in this game, and kind of hanging around a little bit and scoring a little bit earlier in the game caused some problems for Miami. Now, they weren't particularly impressive. Kyron Drones was 19 for 33 for 189, 2 touchdowns and a pick. 50 yards, 52 yards on the ground where he can be particularly dangerous. Bookshai Toten, the running back, 141 yards and a touchdown, 7.4 per carry. He did break a big 55-yarder, though. That helped inflate those numbers a bit. But that was not good to allow him to run for that much. Ward scrambled for a touchdown, had 4, also threw a couple picks. Looked pretty comfortable most of the time. Took a few sacks, though. So there were times that Virginia Tech was able to get to him. He's got to be one of the Heisman frontrunners. Hunter's got to be up there from Colorado. I think the running back from Boise State should be at the number 1 spot right now, quite frankly, putting up eye-popping numbers. And it almost doesn't matter what kind of competition you're going up against. But regardless, Miami survives this one. They score late to take a lead back. And then Virginia Tech kind of goofs around, uses too much time, just really screws around, but ends up being able to put a ball in the air, a Hail Mary, and the ball kind of bounces around on bodies until a Miami player comes running out with it. They go to the review for quite a while. An argument can be made that a Virginia Tech player kind of came down with it, but he never really had full possession. It was originally ruled a touchdown for Virginia Tech, but he never really had possession. I think they did the right thing in overruling it, not calling it a touchdown, allowing Miami to keep the win and stay undefeated. I think that was the right thing to do, but there's going to be a lot of controversy over that and look back on that game. But they survive 5-0 in the rain, looking a little sloppy. Run defense needs to be a little better. Need to not have so many just letting this team back in the game. 508 to 394 was the yardage difference. 3 turnovers, just sloppy. Sloppy play by Miami, who can look dominant or kind of look half asleep. Now, I didn't think we had too many interesting games other than that. Michigan was ahead at home. Minnesota kept in it. I don't think Minnesota's very good. Michigan survives 27-24. An onside kick could have gone the wrong way there, and Michigan could have been in real trouble, but they win that one. Notre Dame, Louisville, I actually have to go back and recheck. I was celebrating my father's 70th birthday, right dead smack in the afternoon while this game was going on, so I did not get to see that live. Tyler Shaw, 3 touchdowns, 264 yards. I know they had an opportunity in this one, but Notre Dame pulled it out. I'm not too surprised by that. Louisville obviously took a thumping to Notre Dame last season, and I think Notre Dame just wanted to, back at their place, wanted to keep the birds under their thumb there. They jumped out to a 21-7 lead and held on late in this one in order to maintain the victory there. A couple teams that'll be still in talks for playoff spots until later in the season, I believe. LSU smashes South Alabama 42-10. USC takes care of Wisconsin 38-21. That's really too bad. Miller Moss pitches the ball another 45 times. I mean, that's what we're going to expect now from USC. 3 touchdowns, 300 yards, and just a pretty solid win. I don't know what to do with Wisconsin. Such a productive job by Luke Fickell over there at Cincinnati, and Wisconsin just does not look like a good football team at all. 2 for 10 on 3rd down, 0 for 2 on 4th down, 286 yards. 4.2 point rush was pretty good. 2 turnovers. But USC, on the other hand, 29 first downs, so Wisconsin's 13. They were 11 for 17 on 3rd down. They were 2 for 2 on 4th, 469 yards. A few more yards, average 4.4 to 4.2 yards per rush. More yards per pass. And they had 3 turnovers, and it still wasn't close. So it's just gross. Wisconsin's just gross right now. Clemson 40-14 over Stanford, who looked like they were in it for a little bit. And, of course, everyone's favorite quarterback on a bad team, Austin Daniels, threw 3 picks. 9 for 19, 71 yards, a touchdown, and 3 picks before he gets banged up and leaves the game. That's pretty much the story of his career right now at Stanford. I'd love to see him on a decent team with decent talent anywhere. See if maybe he could clean up some of his lows and kind of be a more productive quarterback, kind of raise the floor and the ceiling. But I don't think that's going to happen. Iowa 20-0 over Houston. Not a very exciting game. Auburn and Oklahoma. The Sooners 27-21. Peyton Thorne, man, 331 yards and 3 touchdowns. Well, this team can actually throw the ball a bit. Oof, until it goes into a Sooners' hands and they return it for a touchdown that wins the football game. That is a tough beat right there. Texas A&M, 4-1, my little Aggies that I've been rooting for this season that are kind of gross, 21-17 over Arkansas. But these are still 2 interesting squads to watch in the SEC. Still fun to watch play. Taylon Green there, 279 yards passing, able to not really get around too much on the ground in this one. Marcel Reed, 11 for 22, 163 yards, 2 touchdowns. And he gets in for a touchdown on the ground as well, but he doesn't do a whole lot of jogging in this one. But it is a big win for Texas A&M here at home. We do have Boise State 46-24 over Washington State, the first loss of Washington State on the season. And Gente, 29 carries, 26 carries, 259 yards for a nice 10 piece per carry, 4 touchdowns. That is insane. That is absolutely crazy. They don't even need to throw the football. So far this season, he's accounted for 845 yards of offense and 13 touchdowns. He's averaging 10.3 yards per carry. He's leading running backs in all 3 of those stats: yards, average, touchdowns. It's wild. It's unfortunate they lost that game to Oregon by a score. They have an opportunity to do some damage here in the Mountain West, which is kind of looking interesting. UNLV's 4-0. San Jose State's looking all right. Fresno's in there, but man, he should be not only in the Heisman conversation, but those numbers have to count for something. I think those are video game type numbers. We also had to wrap this. Penn State, Illinois was the other game here between 2 ranked teams. Penn State scored a touchdown in this one late to make it 21-7. This is one of those where the offense for the Illinois just look kind of sloppy sometimes. Luke Altmaier was 16 for 25 for 185, a touchdown and a pick. They couldn't run the ball, so 1 touchdown in the first quarter was all that they managed. The defense is good. But it was just Penn State, 7 sacks, 13 tackles for losses. Drew Aller was not good in this one. 15 for 21, 135. I mean, he did what he needed to. It was Allen on the ground, 102 yards and a touchdown. Singleton, 94 yards and a touchdown. They both averaged well over 5 yards per carry. And that was enough, being able to get it done on the ground against the Illini defense and slowly grind away there. But Illinois and Penn State. So Penn State's the lower rung of the upper section of the Big Ten. I guess Illinois is the upper level of the mid section of the Big Ten, right? Something like that. UCLA still struggling. 34-13. Oregon pulls away there. They still do not look very impressive. 31 for 41, 278, 3 touchdowns and a pick for Dillon Gabriel. Jordan James, 103 yards and a touchdown there as well. And UCLA is just not a good football team, which is surprising to no one. Ohio State has no problems at Michigan State, 38-7. As a matter of fact, they kind of take a break for the last quarter and a half of this game. Texas continues to rest Quentin Ewers, who was banged up. Maybe he could have gone for this one if he had to, maybe not. Arch Manning throws 2 touchdowns and rushes for another and has about 350 yards of offense. In this one, nothing super exciting. It wasn't a big difference late, 14-6 at the half, but 35-13 the final over a bad Mississippi State team, real bad Mississippi State team. I think the last game at this point to really touch on before we go through the watch guide for this week would be, Rutgers won. Rutgers won, right? 21-18 over Washington. They moved to 4-0. Well, I want to see them play a better team, quite frankly, and see if they're just going to get slaughtered or if they can hang around a bit. But Colorado managed to win. They are now 3-1. That's not totally surprising, but the fact that they'll have an opportunity to win the Big 12, perhaps that is a little bit more surprising. Just kind of hanging around, thumping UCF, and I don't know. They can run the ball a bit now. The defense isn't impressive, and I don't know. I don't know what it is about this team. I don't like the arrogance or the show-offiness. Travis Hunter is still making big plays. I don't know what they do without him. Sure, Sanders can still make plays with his legs. 3 touchdowns, 290 in this one. The final was 48-21. And the defense had 5 sacks and 13 tackles for losses. Just did not quite see that coming. So perhaps UCF, taking its first loss of the year, was not quite prepared for that. They're still 6 for 13. The Golden Knights were on third down. They had more yards, 461 to 418, but they had 4 turnovers to 1 for the Buffs. And that score discrepancy, though, is still pretty crazy when you have more yards than your opponent. All right, this weekend we have a fun slate. We have some upsets certain to happen, starting with Thursday, Friday. We don't have a particularly loaded slate, but we will get to see Michigan State and Oregon in a late night Friday game. But starting with Thursday, we do have Troy hosting Texas State on ESPNU at 7 o'clock, followed up by UTEP hosting Sam Houston on CBS Sports Network at 9 o'clock. Now, Jackson McLeod is the quarterback there. Jordan McLeod, oh my goodness. Jordan McLeod is the quarterback there at Texas State. He was formerly a UCF Bull, formerly an Arizona Wildcat, formerly a Duke at James Madison, and he's found a home here for Texas State. This is an opening game in the Sun Belt, and so far this year he's thrown for over 1,100 yards, 12 touchdowns, 3 picks, and he's got the Bobcats. They do have a 2-game losing streak so far to Arizona State and Sam Houston by a combined 4 points. But they will have an opportunity to possibly win the Sun Belt Conference, but they would have to grab a win over James Madison. But that's later on down the road. First off, they have to go on the road here and beat up on Troy, who's having a tough start to the year at 1-4. Again, McLeod completing 69% of his passes, 12-3 touchdown to interception ratio. It'll be a good time watching him rain down on the Troy Trojans. Sam Houston, their second year here at the top level of college football after bumping up last season. They're 4-1, 1-0 already in Conference USA. They do have that win over Texas State, New Mexico, Hawaii, Rice. Nothing too impressive. They were walloped at Central Florida 45-14, but they'll be playing at an 0-4 UTEP squad. Not huge margins, both games sitting at under 2 touchdowns right now, but those will be the 2 games on Thursday. So Friday, Canisius State, the newest addition at the highest level of college football here, sitting at 0-4, hosting Jacksonville State at 1-3 on the CBS Sports Network at 7. All right. Then at 7:30, we have TCU at 3-2, and they're hosting 1-4 Houston on ESPN. Again, not very exciting. We're clearly separating at just over, we're heading towards halfway through the season here. Clearly separating the stronger from the weak and kind of the middle class here. Now, Josh Hoover did throw for 3 touchdowns and over 300 yards in an upset. I believe it was an upset over Kansas last week, as the Horned Frogs sitting in a position to make a bowl game after a rough year last season. But again, struggle bus for Houston here. 9 o'clock brings us 2 games. First off, we do have FS1. We'll have number 25 currently in the AP poll, UNLV, at 4-0. They'll be hosting Syracuse, who's 3-1. They're coming off a bye, I do believe. And 7-point favorites at home is UNLV after thumping Fresno State 59-14 last week. We, of course, had a couple guys sit out. I believe it was technically like the third string running back who decided he was going to transfer in UNLV, had to go to another quarterback. Malik Williams, who was 13 for 16 for 182 yards and 3 passing touchdowns. More importantly, he had 12 attributed carries, almost as many carries as throws for 119 yards on the ground and a touchdown as well. They rolled up about 250 yards on the ground altogether, did the Running Rebels, and they were very successful against what was supposed to be a pretty good Fresno State Bulldogs team. 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and they're going to look to do some damage to Syracuse here. Now, the Orangemen under Kyle McCord, they did beat up Holy Cross last week, 42-14. That's why no one had eyes on it. Of course, they struggled in wins over Georgia Tech and Ohio. They did lose to Stanford. McCord, the driving force there for that squad in the Orangemen. And this will be like a fun game here. 9 for 17 last week, 32 first downs. The defense held Holy Cross to 2 for 14 on third and 8 first downs. Of course, these teams were not very comparable. But Syracuse, certainly a team not necessarily expected to win the ACC, but this is Clemson and Miami are looking like the top 2, of course, right now. Still undefeated are Pittsburgh and Duke as well, but we're just entering conference play here in week 6 and games 5 for a lot of teams here. But, Syracuse could have a say in that. But this is going to be a good Friday night game. It's just too bad it's really late on the, pretty late here. We'll be going pretty late Friday night on the East Coast. The other game at 9 o'clock will be on Fox, and that is Michigan State flying across the country to battle Oregon, who sits at 4-0. They've already taken one of their byes so far this season. Their wins, Idaho, at Oregon State, at UCLA, and then they did beat Boise State several weeks back, 37-34, which may be a critical win in kind of determining their strength of schedule almost to this particular point. Left on the beat is Ohio State at home, Illinois at home, Michigan on the road, I guess Wisconsin on the road. Like, looking forward, Oregon's schedule is not, I hate to say not particularly difficult, but they do avoid Ohio State and Penn State, and even some of the surprise teams this year like Indiana, Iowa, Rutgers. They don't play any of those squads. USC. So it could be very interesting for Oregon here. They are 3+ touchdown favorites over Michigan State. That last fell to Boston College and then took a tumble after that to Ohio State 38-7. It was not a great showing last week. Great first quarter, and 35 points scored in the second and third to bludgeon the Spartans. They had 13 first downs. They were 2 for 9 on third downs. Ohio State had 23 firsts, was 8 for 17 on thirds, and they converted 3 of 4 fourth downs. And 483 to 246 yardage edge. It was just not a particularly pretty sight. It was not necessarily an awful game for Chili's. I'll never quite get that right. 13 for 19, 167 yards, touchdown, a pick, but this was just, once they got going, Ohio State just continued to run downhill on them. So that's your 4-pack for Friday. The best game probably Syracuse and UNLV there on the mat. So let's move over to Saturday. In the noon slate again, light, 10 games. And to me, we've got a pretty clean slate here. So my top watch at noon will be number 25 Texas A&M hosting number 9 Missouri. Now, the Aggies are already 2-0 in conference play. They're 4-1 overall. Mizzou is 4-0, 1-0 in SEC play. Texas A&M favored by less than a field goal in this one. It's possible that they'll have Wingman back at quarterback after several weeks out. Marcel Reed has been fine, but it's been more of a focus on the ground game, controlling the clock, that type of deal. So it's possible Connor Wingman will be back for this game. He still only started a half dozen games between this season and last, and a number of injuries. He looked very good in limited sample size against inferior competition. In the better game this year that they played earlier on against, who was it now? Against Notre Dame. They struggled in the opener, but it's possible that we'll get better results now as this team has gelled just a little bit here. Missouri really hasn't looked like a great football team, let alone one that should be ranked in the top 10. They beat Boston College by 6. They survived Vanderbilt in overtime by 3 and took a bye week. And they, of course, shut out Buffalo and Murray State. They're just not a particularly impressive team, I don't think. They are converting nearly 55% on third down. They are scoring 36-plus points per game. They still have a good quarterback there in Cook, who's been not very effective this year compared to how he was looking last year, missing some receivers, just not been super productive, and that's really too bad. His top receiver there, Luther Burden III, was one of the best receivers in the country last season. So far this year, he's got 4 touchdowns, 257 yards on 19 catches. That's 13.5 per. Very effective. So he's got a top guy to throw to. The ground game has been all right. Nate Noel is averaging 6.4 yards per carry. So the offense has definitely been effective when the quarterback is on. The defense has been fairly effective, all things considered. But, Vanderbilt and Boston College are not elite offenses. Not that Texas A&M necessarily is, but I think they're going to have some problems in College Station there. Regardless, this could be an interesting game. One of these teams has to come out looking fairly decent, right? Either Texas A&M is going to be 5-1, or Missouri is going to be 5-0 with a nice win on the road here. Now, that's the top watch, but we have a couple decent channel flippers as well. If Missouri and Texas A&M get too slimy there, my top one is Louisville hosting SMU. Now, Louisville's 3-1. They finally played a decent opponent last week when they came out of a bye. So they had 2 weeks to prepare for Notre Dame, and they lost. They ended up losing on the road there. Tough defeat. And all of a sudden, a team that could possibly be in the race for, it doesn't affect their ACC chances, of course, non-conference game, but for a playoff spot, it's very thin now. And of course, they still have Clemson on the road, Miami at home on the schedule, as well as a surprisingly, decent Kentucky team, at least defensively, on the road to end the season. Of course, that rivalry game. Stanford on the road, they're feisty. Pitt at home, who's surprisingly good. Virginia as well, and they play Boston College on the road. So this is still a good football team. Now, Tyler Schroll, the quarterback, himself has played for 2 different colleges already. This is his 3rd home. He's still a really good quarterback when he can stay healthy. I don't believe that's ever happened to my recollection. But Louisville still has a quality roster. We just have to see them pick up what would be another pretty good win here. SMU didn't look particularly promising to start the season. You have to remember, they beat Nevada 29-24, Nevada team that wasn't expected to be any good, and that's proving true. Then they smashed, Houston Christian? An FCS team, regardless. Then they lost to BYU, who wasn't particularly widely regarded at that point, but 18-15, so that's looking better. Then they got in a shootout with TCU. They won 66-42. Not sure if that shows how prolific the offense is or that the defense is having some problems, as the Mustangs have also played musical quarterback. And then they did wallop Florida State 42-16 last week, which I think was a good win. despite the fact that Florida State looks pretty awful, still going on the road to beat the Seminoles, has to be pretty effective. They were 8 for 15 on third down, 458 to 285 in yardage. 11 yards per pass attempt while holding Florida State to 6.5. Now, DJ Angalili did get hurt in this one. He could be out for a while. And I think it's pretty telling that Florida State didn't want to bench him in their woes anyways. Brock Glenn came into this game. He was 0 for 4 passing. After Angalili went out, he was 12 for 30 with 3 picks and 2 touchdowns. So he's having a rough game as it was. Kevin Jennings was the quarterback here for SMU last week over Stone, who has been banged up and had some performance issues, but Jennings was 16 for 23 for 254 and 3 touchdowns and proved to be very effective. So if he's again going to be the quarterback moving forward over Preston Stone, then SMU should really give Louisville a fight here. And that I would think that those would be the top 2 most entertaining games on the slate in the noon window. As far as your other notables, and they could get interesting as well. I couldn't quite find another one to positively bump up into the channel flipping section. Penn State, currently ranked 7th, will be hosting UCLA, the Bruins. This will be the Fox game. UCLA already 0-2 in conference play and really struggling. Penn State favored by 4 touchdowns here. Drew Aller again didn't have to do a whole lot last week. Run game got it done, and defense, well, UCLA will have problems in this one. Next up in the Big Ten, Wisconsin, 2-2, hosting Purdue, who's 1-3, and Badgers got a win here. Got thumped by Alabama and had a lead, then lost to USC last week. Cannot do that. Tough sledding so far there. Virginia will be hosting Boston College. This is probably one of the better games they'll be on as well. It's just on the ACC network. 3-1 are the Cavaliers. 4-1 is Boston College. This is basically a pick'em game. Now, the Virginia Cavaliers haven't been particularly impressive. Coastal Carolina, Wake Forest, and Richmond are the wins, where they were lost pretty soundly to a Maryland team that's really not that great. So, not a whole lot to expect from Carolina or from Virginia here, I should say. Although they will hit the over 3.5, I think, if we're lucky here, which is their over/under win total preseason, and might have a shot at a bowl game. Boston College, as you know, Thomas Castellanos has made them. I probably didn't say that right either, but again, you don't come here for the pronunciations. Has been a not super effective thrower, though he's averaging over 10 yards per pass attempt, 10-2 touchdown to interception ratio. But the ground game's got going a little bit for Boston College. They can do a few things defensively, and this should be a good game between 2, I guess, mediocre ACC squads. This is not one of the worst games on the slate. This one could be, though. North Carolina's 3-2. They're hosting Pittsburgh at 4-0. This is the ESPN2 game. North Carolina, as we know, 70-50 2 weeks ago. Loss at home to George Mason. They go on the road for the rivalry against Duke. They're ahead. They lose 21-20. So they're just finding ways to not win games. This has been a problem under Mac Brown. He could be out sooner than later. The schedule is forgiving, but they just cannot win a damn game that's worth anything. After this, we have Georgia Tech at Virginia, at Florida State, Wake Forest, at Boston College, NC State, and this team is just not good. We've been playing different quarterbacks since Mac Johnson went down in the opener, and I'm not sure that any of them are particularly outstanding. So, Pittsburgh, though, 4-0, a little shocking there, favored by a field goal on the road. Now, they put up 73 on Youngstown State last week, but that doesn't really matter. They took a bye week already. They have wins over Cincinnati, who's actually a decent-looking football team right now. They do have a win over West Virginia as well, and over a bad Kent State team. I don't think either of these teams are particularly outstanding, but it might be an interesting game in the fact that these two teams are probably about an equal playing level. Eli Holston for Pittsburgh, 12 touchdowns, 2 picks, about 67% completion percentage. Throwing at a decent looking clip there. He might be the best quarterback on the field. And this could be another high scoring game. 63.5 is the over-under. But it's possible we actually see some points in this game. Staying in the ACC, the CW network will have NC State hosting Wake Forest. NC State 3-2. They survived Northern Illinois last week. They can't get quarterback right. Now the defense doesn't look as good. The offense is crappy. It's just a tough team. And Wake Forest is 1-3. But that game is on the CW network. And we do have a couple of undefeated teams still playing. 1-3 Air Force will be hosting 4-0 Navy on CBS. The Midshipmen favored by double digits. And Tulsa 2-3 will be hosting Army at 4-0 and 3-0 in the American Conference already. On ESPNU, Army favored by double digits as well with a 50.5 point over-under. Army expected to run them out of the building. So that is your noon slate there for this upcoming Saturday, October 5th. Now, our afternoon slate is also on the lighter slide here. We have 15 games. I have the top watch. Number 3, Ohio State hosting Iowa. Now, the Hawkeyes, of course, a little bit better offensively this season, but not particularly impressive. They're 3-1 right now. This game will be on CBS primetime afternoon at 3:30. They beat Illinois State. They put 40 points up in that one. They put 38 on Troy. They put 31 up at Minnesota last week. They did lose 20-19 at Iowa State. What a toughie that one was there. They have a really good running back in Caleb Johnson, who's really not talked about at all. He's got 9 touchdowns, averages 8.4 yards per carry. He's got 685 on the season so far. And I mentioned him way back in the preseason, I think, couple months ago at this point. But he's a really good tailback there for the Hawkeyes. It's whether or not they can, disrupt Ohio State at all. I believe the line has fallen under 3 touchdowns in this game. Ohio State, of course, Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall, and Michigan State at this particular point. And they didn't have to do a whole lot after a 31-7 halftime lead to 24. I guess they scored a couple points in the third quarter there. 24-7 halftime lead against Michigan State last week. Will Howard, 21 for 31, 244, 2 touchdowns and an interception. They got a number of quarterbacks in there. Devin Brown, who's been a reserve for a while there, and Julian Sayin, who's been a highly touted recruit there in the backfield as well. We get our Judkins, we get our Henderson getting carries back there. And this group has been pretty healthy, but they haven't needed to bring anyone out. And maybe, just maybe, this is a game where they have to play their starters 2.5 quarters. Health hasn't really been a problem, and maybe we'll get to see guys for an extended period here. And Iowa, maybe they can hang around a little bit. Certainly don't expect it, but would like to see Ohio State have to try against a quality defense here. Therefore, the top watch in the afternoon slate, but we've got a few other options here. Channel flippers. Now, we have a number of ranked or undefeated teams on the road. Most of them fall in the evening slate, but we've got a couple going on here in the afternoon. The top one is South Carolina hosting Ole Miss. Of course, the Rebels had a big problem last week when they struggled against a good defense there in Kentucky. And now they're playing a South Carolina squad here that's managed to get themselves to 3-1, 1-1 in SEC play. Mississippi's favored by less than 10 points on ESPN in this 3:30 matchup. And it's a little bit of a show us something in the hands of Jackson Dart here. Like, can you really put some points on a team that's not that impressive in South Carolina. They've managed wins against Old Dominion. They beat this Kentucky team 31-6, which is their claim to fame right now. They beat Akron 50-7, and they played LSU 36-33. Sellers, the main quarterback. Ashford played last week, and he put up pretty good numbers because Sellers had a banged up ankle. Not sure which quarterback is going to start in this one, but it doesn't seem to really matter. What does matter is it's hard to win there at the home court of the South Carolina Gamecocks there in Columbiaville. There we go. I had it at the top of my brain. Very difficult place to play. It's not a night game, obviously, in Willie Bryce Stadium, but still be very difficult for Ole Miss, which has put up very impressive numbers offensively, brought in a number of transfers to a team that's got more starting production than all but a couple teams in the entire country. But had to win impressive games on the road and against some decent competition to really show that they've got what it takes to make the playoffs or compete with the SEC, to really show that they're anything more than a middling team, or the top of a middling tier, let's say, tier 2, tier 3, depending on how you sanction out your teams here. And this will be a test, quite frankly. South Carolina is one of the top teams in terms of sacks given out on the defensive end, thanks to Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart at the edge positions. 5.5 sacks for Kennard on the season. We could have some future NFLers here on the defensive line. So I expect Ole Miss to certainly have some problems. I'll be keeping a close eye on this game. It might even turn into the top watch for the afternoon. Nebraska will also be hosting Rutgers. As we know, the undefeated mighty Rutgers Scarlet Knights have a killer running game, one of the best, most complete offensive line units in the entire country. This is a 4 o'clock FS1 game. Nebraska here, 4-1. They're favored by a touchdown at home in Lincoln with a 40.5 point over-under. So expected to be, of course, a low-scoring game here. Nebraska, of course, came up just short to Illinois a couple weeks ago and then pounded a bad Purdue team on the road 28-10 last week. They have yet to really show that they can beat a high-quality opponent as well. Dylan Raiola, I always want to say Ravioli when I see his last name, was not particularly effective last week. 257 yards on 17 completions on 27 attempts, only one touchdown. They were 1 for 8 on third down, 418 yards. They held Purdue to 224. They still had 11 penalties in this game. Purdue shot themselves with 13. They had an effective ground game, but Raiola still has to kind of effectively navigate a really good team yet. And Rutgers may be that with coming into town. So a couple challenging games here with Ole Miss and Rutgers on the road. Now, Rutgers themselves, again, have not beaten really high-quality competition. Howard, Akron, at Virginia Tech, who's showing some life. Washington, who's shown some life as well. The quarterback position is not the strong point. The former, what do they call him, the Greek arm at Minnesota, Athan Kalakamatis, is in there at the quarterback position. He doesn't get sacked very often. 7-1 touchdown interception ratio, only completing about 61.5% of his passes. But Kyle Mongai has 589 yards rushing, so over 6 yards per clip, and 6 touchdowns to help lead. Again, a very good rushing attack there, and the defense has been pretty good as well. But both teams that need to really beat a quality opponent. Now, it'd be a bigger win for Rutgers on the road, but still the Cornhuskers, however this turns out, we either have a 5-0 Rutgers team, which would be incredible, or a 4-1 Nebraska team. Regardless how this turns out, this will be a good battle in the Big Ten. Just don't expect a whole lot of points in this one. More of a defensive edge here for these two teams. So the other notable games here, at the 1 o'clock slot, you have UAB hosting Tulane, who's still one of the top teams in the American Conference. Now, this will be squirreled away on FS1. Tulane 3-2 right now, about 2 touchdown favorites in this one. UAB is 1-3, and they've had their struggles here in the coaching tenure with Trent Dilfer. But they could still be a team that does a little damage here. They put up 27 in a 10-point loss at Arkansas. They eventually fell to Navy last week. That wasn't too much of a game, and they can do a few things. They're not great. They can do a few things. Tulane themselves has had some problems this year. Of course, new coaching staff, new roster, all of that. They beat Louisiana, South Florida, Southeast Louisiana. Fell by a touchdown to Kansas State and a couple scores to Oklahoma. But this is still a quality football team that can run the ball, they can throw the ball, and they can sack your quarterback. 14 sacks on the season puts them up there in the rankings overall, and they'll be competing in the American Conference. Also, that 3:30 window, we do have Georgia sitting at the number 5 slot, 3-1, 24-point favorites over Auburn, who's 2-3 right now, already 0-2 in the SEC. So this is the ABC game. I don't expect a whole lot out of Auburn, all things considered, and that is that Peyton Thorne had a big day throwing last week, but it's very atypical of him and what's expected in this Hugh Freeze-guided team and offense. Yet Georgia has looked kind of waffly now. Now, Alabama is certainly not Auburn, and Auburn has not even lived up to their own reputation, and losses to Cal and just some gross play overall this season. I was personally hoping, as a team on my top watch list, top teams to tune into before the season started, that they'd be further along. But they've now lost to Cal. They've lost by 10 to Arkansas. They've lost by 6 to Oklahoma. They just can't quite notch a big win. Alabama, A&M, and New Mexico are their bodies so far. So they're actually not as close as you may think to striking, I think, with some of these bigger teams. They nearly had Oklahoma last week. I don't think Oklahoma's nearly as good as the rankings would indicate. Obviously, we know they have offensive issues. And Auburn nearly had the game last week before Peyton Thorne threw it away. But we'll see here if they can do anything to Georgia. Again, 24 seems like a massive line for a team that struggled so much last week. It's possible that they come back home here and just body bag Auburn. That seems to be the thought process. But I do have that as a notable. Stanford. Now, this is not as exciting if Ashton Daniels is still hurt. He was banged up last game, had to go out. This poor guy's hurt all the time behind this offensive line. But they're 2-2. They're hosting Virginia Tech, who's 2-3 on the ACC network. Virginia Tech, dare we say, showing a little life here. A team that was possibly a dark horse to compete in the ACC. Back-to-back losses to Rutgers and Miami, close ones, combined 7 points, has kind of shuttered the doors on that thought process a little bit there. Yet they have an opportunity here to move to 500, or Stanford, who has a number of issues, can move forward here. This will still be an interesting game. I think competitive at the very least. So I'll have my eyes on that one. Oklahoma State will be hosting West Virginia. I don't know if I touched on this on the review. Oklahoma State, of course, got mowed down last week by Kansas State. Oklahoma State's offense is kind of gone in the toilet. You know, the quarterback there, Alan Bowman, was having some problems, and Ollie Gordon's having problems running the football as well. Just problems all over the place for a team that usually navigates and figures things out, quite frankly. But just not getting it done for the Oklahoma Cowboys. This particular season is not it. The final last week was 42-20 on the road at Kansas State. Now, Bowman did throw for 364 yards, but it was just not a good game for them at all. So turning around here, they'll be hosting a 2-2 West Virginia team who's been kind of off the reservation for a little bit. That opening game, they did play Penn State, of course. They lost 34-12. Then they beat Albany. They lost to Pitt 38-34 in what was not necessarily a big-time game. And then they beat Kansas last week, who's kind of fallen off in their own right. And they had a bye week in the mix there as well. So, will the Mountaineers come in and cause some problems for the Oklahoma Cowboys, where they kind of bounce back? Again, this is not high priority watching anymore, even in the feisty Big 12 here. But still, it could be a nice back and forth game in the Big 12. And finally, Vanderbilt, they'll be hosting number 1 Alabama. Did I jot that down right? Yes, Vanderbilt will be hosting number 1 Alabama on the SEC Network at one of these staggered times, 4:15 Eastern. Alabama favored by about 20 plus 23 I'm seeing right now. Vanderbilt a decent start to the season, and that's tapered off pretty quick. And of course, if you don't think miles of improvement of Milroe and how this Alabama team looked after last week, then I don't know what to tell you. They still have their flaws, young secondary, offensive line at times, but man, they look so good in beating Georgia and even surviving that comeback there. Vanderbilt, though, after beating Virginia Tech in the opener and slicing down Akron State, has lost to Georgia State and a close one with Missouri on the road. They're actually real close to a 4-0 football team, but they'll have their hands full when Alabama comes to town. This is one I'll certainly be watching portions of as well, but it's still possible. Even if you're looking at what will ultimately, let's say, finishes the number 1 team to, let's say, number 10 team. The number 1 team may still mash the number 10 team by 3 touchdowns. So if Alabama's truly a top team in the country, even a top 5 team, let's say top 4, like they finish in the final 4 of the playoffs per se, or they're charted for that course, even if Vanderbilt was a top 20 team, they'd still get absolutely eviscerated by Alabama playing at its peak. Not necessarily that they will, coming off a Georgia high and playing on the road here. But what I'm saying is it certainly looks like they'll still have plenty of juice to beat down on the Vanderbilt Commodores. But it'd still be nice if they could play a pretty good ball game here. I guess we'll see. Now, the evening slate is where things really get spicy here. So we have Tennessee on the road at Arkansas, Clemson on the road at Florida State, Michigan at Washington, USC at Minnesota. So a number of notable teams that could potentially be in the playoffs on the road there as favorites. I believe Michigan might be an underdog to Washington here. In addition to that, we have Duke, who's currently undefeated on the road at Georgia Tech. We also have James Madison undefeated on the road at Louisiana Monroe. So we have a number of big games on the slate here. So I hope you're going to be prepped and ready for Saturday evening. I have as the top watch Arkansas hosting number 4, currently ranked Tennessee. I might even have them up a spot in my personal poll here. 7:30 ABC is this game. Arkansas is currently sitting at 3-2. Tennessee just under a 2-touchdown favorite in this game. Points are expected. Arkansas, of course, losing to Texas A&M last week. Also losing to Oklahoma State earlier in the year. Wins over Alabama, UAB, and Arkansas Pine Bluff at this particular point. You never quite know what you're getting out of this squad. They were actually productive enough to beat Texas A&M last week. They had more first downs. They were better on third down. They had almost 100 more yards of offense. And they had 3 turnovers to 0 for Texas A&M, yet it was a 4-point game. So this could be an interesting one here. Now, Tennessee on the road again. They're coming off a bye. And we have Nico here, his second road test. Again, they survived Oklahoma last time out, 25-15. You can argue that they didn't have to show quite as much as they needed to once they saw that Oklahoma was basically unable to move the ball. They had to score a touchdown late in that one to even make it relatively interesting. So another competitive environment here, an evening game. Can Arkansas and its erraticness, I guess, do some damage to Tennessee, who's proved to be pretty good in the trenches? The defense looked pretty good. Arkansas's passing game is not in a position to challenge Tennessee's secondary, which is where the weakness kind of lies and where to exploit that team. And I'm not sure if they can do enough to really disrupt Nico unless they're able to get their sack spurts, their sack masters after they get some pressure back there. So this may not be the spot for an upset, but I have it as my top watch because it could certainly happen. The channel flippers. Now, Florida State switching quarterbacks here, going back to the young man, Brock Glenn, who got some experience last season when Jordan, oh my goodness, his name's eluding me right now. The quarterback last season went down injured, and he played in the bowl game and as the reserve quarterback there. With DJU going down, he will have an opportunity to start here. He's not looked great in his chances to start the last couple seasons, and in his playing time, I don't have a whole lot of expectations of great things from him. And as we know, Florida State just hasn't looked good at all this season. They're 1-4 at this moment. Clemson's almost 14-point favorites on the road, and they've been shredding teams ever since that blowout loss to Georgia. I think this is a top 10 team in Clemson. I had them right around the 10 spot. If I was power ranking teams today, probably do a full power ranking slot after this weekend, after a couple things shake out. But their offense has been great, scoring 66, 59, and 40 points the last 3 weeks. Outside of the 34-3 loss to Georgia, they've done some damage. So I think they'll do the same thing here to a kind of reeling Florida State team, and their bowl chances will certainly be in jeopardy. So let's take a look at the next channel flipper here. It is Washington hosting Michigan. As we know now, Michigan is going to be one-dimensional with a few tosses of the football downfield mixed in by Orji. It's going to be pretty much a ground and pound game. Mullins has been very good for Michigan there. Washington is favored at home here by less than a field goal. They did lose to Rutgers on the road last week. They did lose to Washington State in the Apple Cup. Wins over Weber, Eastern Michigan, and Northwestern have not been very impressive. But Will Rogers here, after he left Mississippi State, has looked very good. Almost 75% completion percentage, 1,300 yards, 10 touchdowns, no picks. The pocket's been relatively clean for him. They can run the ball a little bit. Jonathan Coleman's been pretty good back there. And the defense is doing a pretty good job for a team that's completely rebuilt itself. Now, that being said, losing to Rutgers and Washington State doesn't exactly bode well for what they have going on. But do they have the ability to disrupt what Michigan has going on? And can they score some points against that defense? It's certainly possible. I don't know why exactly they're favored at home. That's not where I would have it. Let's check on our next game here. Minnesota hosting USC. USC seems to have some questions up front in that offensive line. Miller Moss seems to be a pretty good quarterback there for USC, currently ranked 11th and sitting at 3-1. Their last win was over Wisconsin last week, where they trailed early and came back and won that football game. Of course, they looked kind of rough at Michigan, but nearly came away with that win as well. They beat LSU earlier in the year. That's 3 tough games already for this team that's pretty darn experienced. Minnesota is just plodding along here at 2-3. They're 8-point underdogs at home here. They have losses to North Carolina, Iowa, and Michigan, wins over Rhode Island and Nevada. The defense does seem to be pretty good, though. It does seem like it's going to be an effort for USC to put up some points here. Don't expect to see a lot of high scoring. 51.5 is where the number sits, the over-under right now. I don't know that we're necessarily going to see quite that high number. That's not where I would quite pin this game at. Brosmer is completing 66% of his passes for the Gophers, not throwing it really far downfield. They aren't running the ball. They're middle of the pack rushing team, quite frankly. They have a decent running back there, and Darius Taylor at 5 yards per clip. He's running that ball, and he's splitting carries with Marcus Major as well. But it's they're kind of just plodding along, which is why they're a 2-3 ball club right now. So that game will be on the Big Ten Network. Washington, Michigan will be on NBC. Tennessee, Arkansas will be the ABC game. And Clemson, Florida State will be on ESPN. So one of those, at least one of those, will probably be a surprise upset there, even though Washington's technically favored in that Michigan game. And Georgia Tech hosting Duke is the other game I have in my channel flipper section here. Again, I'm still feeling pretty good about the Yellow Jackets and their ability to hit a high ceiling while maintaining a mediocre floor. They're sitting at 3-2 right now. 1-2 in the conference. They are 9-point favorites at home over undefeated Duke, who again has still not looked really prolific this season. They were down 20 points to North Carolina last week before they scored 3 touchdowns to make the comeback victory in that rivalry game. Yellow Jackets lost to Louisville on the road last week. It was a turnover that helped create a 12-point final margin. So they're very much in the mix for that game. They lost by 2 at Syracuse, and they have 3 mediocre wins. One of those I'm counting as Florida State at this particular moment, so that's how far they've fallen. Haynes King is both this team's leading rusher, leading in rushing touchdowns with 5. He also is completing almost 74% of his passes, almost 1,300 yards on the season so far, and they've already taken a bye week. This offense can just really roll at times. I think they're a little smaller in the trenches than some squads, which could be problematic, obviously. I'm not sure that Duke necessarily has the bodies to really be a threat, which is probably why the sits at 9 points their way with the 54.5 point over-under. But points are expected, and this one will Duke go down. So in the notable section, I did push Louisiana Monroe hosting James Madison. Not necessarily can't miss action. I don't think Louisiana Monroe is very good, although they've accumulated this 3-1 record. This is the ESPN U game. James Madison favored by 17 points with the 48.5 point over-under. The Dukies have beat Ball State, North Carolina in that 70-50 shootout. Gardner-Webb, they scraped by in Charlotte. So they've had their struggles and their big point games, but they've managed to do it so far, the Dukies have, and they remain undefeated. The other games I have on the slate, Oregon State hosting Colorado State. That's actually the first one on the ledger. This is on the CW network at 6:30. I don't have a lot of strong feelings for either of these teams. I don't think they're particularly great, but Oregon State's currently sitting at 3-1. Colorado State is 2-2. Double-digit favorites at home are the Oregon State Beavers. How about Boise State hosting Utah State? 3-1, ranked in the top 25 are the Broncos. Almost 4 touchdown favorites, expected to really put some points on the board here against the Aggies on FS2 at 7 o'clock. And we're going to see, hopefully, some handoffs to everyone's beloved running back now, Ashton Jeanty, as he hopes to build on his 845 yards and 13 touchdowns on the ground. This team is almost a must-watch to see what kind of numbers he can put up each evening. So I'll be trying to get at least some eyes on that, or a box score watch to see what's going on there as they feed that beast. Iowa State will also be hosting Baylor in another Big 12 battle. We're not entirely certain what's going to happen there. Iowa State sitting at 4-0 and currently a favorite for the conference. Baylor 2-3. That is the Fox game. Nearly 2-score favorites are the Cyclones at this moment. Florida will be hosting UCF at 7:45 on the SEC network. This would have looked a little better if UCF had beaten Colorado last week. As it is, we'll see if Florida can push for a bowl game. They're underdogs by nearly a field goal at home in this game, which is kind of crazy to think. But their last couple wins over Mississippi State, over Samford, not impressive. Losses to Texas A&M and to Miami. Legway, I'm not sure if he's going to be starting or if it's going to be Mertz. I don't really know what Florida's going to be doing in this game, as it seems like the coach there is a dead man walking at this particular point. UCF can still run the football. This could be a fun game, and we still have a 61.5 point over-under here, or it might be kind of a slop fest. Not quite sure what's going on in Florida Nation there. San Jose State's off to a good start, and they'll be hosting the Nevada Wolfpack in Mountain West Conference play. This is on True TV at 7:30. 3-1 are the Spartans. 2-3 is Nevada. Spartans favored by almost a touchdown there. And finally, I have Arizona State and Kansas on ESPN2 at 8 o'clock. 3-1 Arizona State, 1-4 Kansas. Kind of surprising to see the records for those teams as they are. You'd almost think they were flip-flopped if I told you there was a 3-1 team and a 1-4 team in this game headed in. Arizona State favored by almost a field goal. Kansas could fall to 1-5. That would just be devastating for a team that's returned a lot of good members here. And they've just been flat this season. The offense is not the same. Daniels is not the same at quarterback. It's kind of devastating to see. But 4 straight losses now at Illinois, home to UNLV, at West Virginia, home to TCU. They couldn't catch any of those teams. So they might get Houston at home next week. They definitely should. But this Saturday at Arizona State, they are underdogs. While the Sun Devils could push to 5-1 in a bowl game, which would be a little bit ahead of their the timeline there for Kenny Dillingham in rebuilding that program. Now, we only have 2 games on the late night slate, but they're both pretty solid here. California at 3-1 will be hosting number 8 Miami, who's 5-0 at 10:30 on ESPN. Only 10-point favorites on the road is Miami after slowly making its way back against Virginia Tech last week, only to win on that last-second Hail Mary that was ruled not really caught, touched out of bounds by a Miami player. That whole kerfuffle there. Now they're flying across country to California. You have to wonder if they're a little sidetracked after the storm weather that's been happening in that region. And you have to see if Cal might be able to pick them off. I still think Miami's a much better team. Kind of surprised the line isn't a touch higher, but that's what you get after looking pretty sloppy last week. Cal lost to Florida State. That is the only win for the Seminoles so far this season. And they also have wins over Auburn and that San Diego State win as well. Both of those teams look not good so far this season. So Cal aiming for a bowl game, but just have not looked like a particularly great team. But good for them to be at the spot that they are right now. 3-1 Arizona hosting 4-1 Texas Tech at 11 on Fox is the final game on the slate. Arizona favored by nearly a touchdown, 64.5 point over-under. That's tied for the highest over-under spread on the day, along with the Oklahoma State game in the afternoon. So a lot of points expected in this one. Texas Tech, a little surprising. The schedule hasn't been crazy difficult, but they pushed through Cincinnati, Arizona State, North Texas, and they made it through Abilene Christie in that opening, 52-51. The only loss was a thumping at Washington State. Again, I don't think this is a very good football team. 44-41 over Cincinnati was the final last week. I think Cincinnati's a decent team. I think Texas Tech is a decent team. But when you look at 4-1, you're like, oh man, isn't that team pushing towards the rankings? I'm not so sure about that. Morton at quarterbacks completed 63% of his passes for over 1,400 yards. One of the best marks in the country, 14 touchdowns and 2 picks. They can run the ball a little bit. The defense is not good. And Arizona, they snagged a really big win last week when they were able to beat Utah with no Cam Rising. They were thumped at Kansas State. They had a weird game over North Arizona that was a win, and over New Mexico. The defense is not looking very good. They're able to put up some points there. And we have McMillan, who should probably see more targets this week after not seeing very many last week. So he's still a big-time playmaker. Every time he's not quite as included in the game plan, I expect them to try and go back to him the following week and really kind of press the issue. So this could be an awesome, high-flying ending to the evening there in Tucson under the lights at 8 p.m. local time there in the desert. All right, here we go. Your categories for your TV guide, your top watch. Now, most would argue, of course, that it's going to be the ranked matchup of Texas A&M hosting Missouri, especially with A&M slightly favored there. And I would tend to agree most of the time. I think that's an important game, but that's going to be 1B to me. 1A, I just want to see Tennessee playing an exotic, there we go, team in Arkansas on the road in the evening. It'll be a night game. Arkansas will be all riled up. The cries of Suey, Suey will be heard off in the distance. Let's just see if this is going to be a challenge for Tennessee, or if they're truly going to come in and thump Arkansas, and Nico's going to have a nice win on the road win here, another big one for him, and the Tennessee Vols move to 5-0. Let's see what happens here. I think that's going to be the most interesting game. There's just a chance that Texas A&M somehow just looks ugly, or Missouri just looks ugly. That is a big game, but that's 1B to me. I think that I just think Tennessee Arkansas is more appealing if you have to sit down and you only get the chance to watch one game. That's the one I would be checking out. Plus, that evening slate is loaded. My audible game is the Ole Miss Running Rebels heading to Columbiaville to play the Gamecocks. It's Cocktober. Let's see if we get a rise out of the folks there in South Carolina land, and they beat Ole Miss back-to-back. That would be really something. Or if the Rebels can really muster up and win after a big loss. That is in the afternoon window, where Iowa, Ohio State, Rutgers, Nebraska, Georgia, Auburn, Indiana, Northwestern is going on. By the way, Indiana, more touchdowns than any other team in the country, and third in points per game scored on average. It's just amazing what they're able to do there. But again, they're playing Northwestern. Could be problematic, but could also be just a boring-ass game, quite frankly. Be nice to see Indiana win that one. But nevertheless, Ole Miss at South Carolina in the slot for audible. Next up, I have underrated. I have Pittsburgh at North Carolina. This is tied for the highest over-under along with the Texas Tech game. And Pittsburgh has an opportunity on the road here where they're favored to move to 5-0. North Carolina in the past 2 weeks, again, has lost a game at home, 70-50 to George Mason, and then turned around and led on the road in a rivalry game, 20-0, and then lost 21-20. A lot of contradictions in there. Can't win a high-scoring game, can't win a low-scoring game, can't keep keep opponents under 30, can't keep them under 60, can't win on the road, just all kinds of contradictions and everything that happened in all those games. Was winning in a rivalry, let a smaller school beat you at home, and they managed to lose both games. Just a lot of contradictions in this team, but we could have a whole lot of points, and it could be very, very fun if you want to watch a whole lot of offense and not a whole lot of defense. For small screen starlets category, I do have the Louisiana Monroe Warhawks hosting James Monroe in that big game, as detailed earlier, as far as a bigger matchup between non-Power 5 schools in the evening slate there. And finally, late night snack. I do have Arizona hosting Texas Tech. Of course, we just discussed those two games, two good ones to have on there. But Arizona hosting Texas Tech, I think, will be the better one of those two. Thanks for tuning in to the Michael Welch Podcast. Enjoy the upsets. We'll see what happens here. I'll have a new list of my top 20, maybe top 15, top 20 sometimes. We're just throwing teams in at the end there. Next week, thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the football.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings. I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into a